I think there's a couple more books you didn't read from, actually. So I'd love to start where you ended with the precision of poetry, which I think is a great expression. But I want to go back a bit, because I don't know if many people here know, but your initial education and training was as an architect. And I'm interested about the transition from architecture to your initial writing, and whether there was something that you took from the precision of architecture or the craft of that particular domain into your early writing, which did take the form of nonfiction and also screenplays before you wrote The God of Small Things. What was that process? What led you there?
Well, actually, I think, when I was growing up in Kerala, in this little village, and before that...
I think we're getting some feedback.
Oh.
One moment.
Okay.
Do we need to maybe adjust the microphone here? Or are we good? Okay.
So when I was very young, let's say, I didn't think that there was anything else that I was going to be other than a writer. In fact, recently, before I came to Kerala, actually, my mother had left my father, and I was about 3 or something, and then I was being taught by this really frightening Australian missionary called Miss Mitten. And she used to tell me that she could see Satan in my eyes. So maybe she was right, so the first coherent sentence that I ever wrote was, "I hate Miss Mitten and I think her knickers are torn." So I think I was before I became an architect, I was heading towards being a writer. But then somehow when I went to Delhi, and I basically ran away from home when I was 16. So it didn't seem that it would ever be possible to be a writer. And yet I do feel that it's almost as though even now, there's a sense of structure in what I write that I can only, it's almost like being on a drawing board. It's that important to me. How a story is told is almost more important than the story. And it's something that I feel inside myself, almost like structuring a building. And then, especially when I write fiction, there isn't any sense in which I could possibly write a story that begins in the beginning and ends at the end. It's just not. It's not something I can do. I do approach it like a building, and or even a city maybe, and you drive around it, and you go through the rooms, and you look from inside out, and you look from outside in, and time is a building material. Chronology is a building material for me to be bent and tested and all of that. Yeah.
So tell me about the epigraph to The God of Small Things. How did you first encounter the work of Berger, and what were the other influences at that time? And then I'd like to come back to then Berger and your new novel, because there's an interesting story there as well.
Well, I think like most people probably at the time, I encountered him through ways of seeing, Obviously, as a student of design and architecture and studying art and things, that was a very, very interesting and important book for us. And then it led to his other work, But when I wrote, after The God of Small Things was published, I remember this day so clearly, coming home, and it was at the time of fax machines, and I saw this long fax in his most beautiful handwriting, and my dogs were wrapped in it. And it was a letter from John Berger, you know, who obviously I didn't know personally, but he had written to me. He had read the book, and then he had read the political essays, and he said, I remember the phrase he used saying, it was like someone walking on two legs, you know, like they're both sort of, you know, part of the whole, you know, they're not separate. And then I met him, and then I just grew to love him so much, you know, not just because of his writing, but there's something about his stillness that I loved, you know, this ability to just, I think, which most of us have lost because of cell phones and all the stuff that's going on, you know, this ability to just concentrate on the moment, on what is being said. It's such an extraordinary thing. When I was writing this, he was the only person that I read stuff to, and it felt like rain falling on earth, you know. You knew that every word, every pause, every space between the words was being attended to. It was wonderful. He, I mean, in fact, just I started writing this book 10 years ago, and the first time he just commanded me, he said, just sit down here and open your computer and read what you're writing. And then he told me, you go back and please do not do anything else but this novel. And I swore to him. And when I went back, the note came under my door to go into the forest, you know. And I went, and then, you know, a lot happened after that essay came out. So, but he used to call me Utmost, because he knew the title. And once I don't know, I was upset about something, and I told him, and he said, imagine I'm standing behind you and flapping my ears to cool you down like an elephant. So I said, thanks, Jumbo. And then he used to call himself Jumbo to me. So he waited for this book, you know. The minute I finished writing it, which was in August, the first thing I did was to head to him. And he wasn't well, and I knew that he wasn't the kind of man that was going to live an unwell life. So he just held my hand, and I read a large part of the book to him. And then he went away. But he waited.
So 10 years ago, you started writing this. What was the moment? What was the inception? What was the process?
Well, it's hard to say, you know. I mean, I think the journeys of the last 20 years of seeing things and in some ways responding to them extremely clearly in a political essay, and yet being filled with the humanity and the craziness of what you were going through and enduring. I knew, I mean, especially in a place like Kashmir, you know, you cannot tell the story of Kashmir solely in an evidentiary reportage way, because the very air is seeded with a kind of terror, you know. So I think it began to accumulate in me the knowledge that fiction is truth, and that I was not able to communicate what I needed to purely in any non-fiction essay, and I think the first, if there's such a thing as a first impetus, it was one night. I mean, I used to spend many nights out on the streets with these various resistance movements which would come and, you know, live on the streets for weeks and months, and you know, I would be there on the pavement with them all night sometimes. And one night, this baby appeared on the pavement in the midst of all these movements, who knew so much about so many things, but they didn't know what to do with this baby. And somehow it made me think, you know. And I think that, I mean, it's not the beginning of the book, obviously, but it's very much a part of the book. But yeah, I think it's like you suddenly start to feel like some kind of a sedimentary rock, you know, with all these layers and layers of experience, of thinking about things, and also of feeling that, I mean, of also feeling a sense of challenge of what can fiction do, you know, because it's not. You know, it's not just a story about some people, you know. The idea was for me very much like, can you write a book where you never walk past anybody, you know, sit down and smoke a cigarette, even with the smallest guy, you know, and can you make the city into a person? Can you make the foreground into the background? You know, a little experimental on that front.
I mean, I feel there's an obvious connection to some of the themes that you just spoke about, where the question is not just Modi as a person, or he who shall not be named here as a person, but what structures, what way of being allowed them to come to power? What have we failed to do as an opposition that allowed them to come to power? How do we learn from that as we think about how to rise to the challenges of this moment?
Well, I mean, it's very tempting to put Modi and Trump in, you know, and say, oh, look, they're the same kind of thing. But in fact, I think they're quite different, because, I mean, you know better than me about the situation here, but from what, you know, from the way I see it, surely Trump is the residue of the failure of the Democrats, you know, and he's a man who lives in a golden tower. Let's not talk about golden shower, but golden tower, and has sort of set himself up as some kind of trade union leader. You know, this is the kind of psychosis of what we're going through now. Like, you sit on a golden throne and you're like the biggest corporate businessman you can be, and you're really winning votes from the working class. And the people who claim to be the representatives of the working class have forgotten what that even means, right? So, but Modi, and so Trump, I mean, he's somewhat of an outlier who seems to make even the Republican establishment pretty uncomfortable, because they don't exactly know what he's going to say or how he's going to be from day to day. And, you know, maybe, but Modi is not that. You know, Modi belongs to an organization called the RSS, as I said earlier, which was born in 1925 and has been working towards this moment for close to 100 years. So they have penetrated all the institutions of democracy. I mean, whatever else they have hundreds of thousands of workers. They work in the forest, they work with the indigenous people, they work in primary schools, they work in publishing, they have everything is taped up, you know. So it's a culmination of 100 years of unstinting labor towards declaring India a Hindu nation. And the violence of it now is that they have, for the first time in their own history, secured such a massive majority in parliament and in various states. And so now the violence is being unleashed in ways that are absolutely terrifying. I mean, people are just pulling Muslims' beards, forcing them to chant Hindu slogans, forcing them to wear tikas, lynching them on the streets. The same with Dalits who are being killed, flogged on the streets openly for transporting cattle. Yesterday, 2 Muslims were lynched. The thing that they fear more than anything else, because they have defeated the political opposition, what they fear more than anything else is not even intellect, just cleverness. I mean, just so they're dismantling universities, they're replacing syllabuses, and in places like Kashmir, the belligerence is now being met by a population that has lost all fear. So there are girls in hijab holding basketball, throwing stones at military tanks. The situation is so terrifying. When a man is lynched, in 2015, a man was lynched for suspected to have beef in his fridge. And when they say that in front of his family, in front of crowds, just near Delhi, and when they say they're going to take the evidence for forensic examination, they don't mean the body of the man, they mean the food in the fridge to see if it's beef or it's not beef, and Muslims are being driven into refugee camps. We are set to have them control both houses and change the Indian constitution, which they've always said they will do. So it will quite likely no longer even formally be called a secular socialist republic. I mean, socialist, forget, long ago. But I mean, no one has been secular, but at least they pretended to be. And now there will be no pretense. Writers are being killed. There are thousands of people in jail being charged with sedition or charged under this Public Security Act, jail without trial, hundreds of Muslims, hundreds of indigenous people. So it's a and it's not, and obviously it all goes pretty much under the radar, not totally unreported, but as long as the markets are open, as long as it's a good finance destination, you're not going to hear a coherent story about this, and about the fact that in the 2014 elections, he was backed by massive corporate money,
What about the kind of liberal intellectual class in India? Like, where do they stand in this whole process?
Liberals, do they stand? They move around a lot, right? But see, even the liberals have their backs to the wall now. Though the liberals have managed, Indian liberals, intellectuals have managed to swallow quite a lot of a horror, So this is just like they have had very little to say about Kashmir or about what's happening in the Northeast, very little to say about caste, very little to say about displacement or privatization. Secular liberals and Gandhians do speak about Hindu fundamentalism and the fact that we are at least supposed to be a secular republic, and they are vociferous about that. But every other form of inequality, which is not unconnected to this, the rise of economic neoliberalism and Hindu nationalism has happened side by side, and the belligerence of the state requires, both things require a belligerent state to put in place. Both things require mobs that go around massacring people and raping women to be given impunity. So that politics of impunity has been given a pretty free ride by liberals for a long time, but now they are feeling the heat.
I wonder, though, about, you said that you didn't want to be someone who was translating the East to the West, translating India to the outside world, but it still seems something is lost in the translation from the certain cultural figures and writers who do play that role, that part of the lack of translation of some of the realities that you're documenting is people who are presenting a romanticized or almost Orientalist vision of India.
Yeah, but that's an old story, isn't it? Eventually the thing is that it's also the case that there is a space being created for that kind of thing, and that space is then occupied, Mm-hmm. So that does happen. But when I said I didn't want to be an interpreter, what I meant is that I almost meant it in terms of how you write prose. Mm-hmm. Like you don't want to keep explaining things like a school teacher or something, This is the way we wash our hair, and this is the way we brush our teeth. So that's what I meant,
Right.
That, you trust that people who really want to know will walk that extra mile. And nowadays it's easy to walk that extra mile,
So I think that might be an interesting place to see if you would like to read some from your new novel.
Yeah. Well, it's the reason that I don't want to read a lot is not because I'm being secretive. The novel hasn't come out yet, and I want her to have her own birthday, So I'll just read like it's not even the first chapter, just before the first chapter, and then a page from the inside. The novel is dedicated to the unconsoled. At magic hour, when the sun has gone but the light has not, armies of flying foxes unhinge themselves from the banyan trees in the old graveyard and drift across the city like smoke. When the bats leave, the crows come home. Not all the din of their homecoming fills the silence left by sparrows that have gone missing, and the old white-backed vultures, custodians of the dead for more than 100 million years that have been wiped out. The vultures died of diclofenac poisoning. Diclofenac, cow aspirin, given to cattle as a muscle relaxant to ease pain and increase the production of milk, worked like nerve gas on white-backed vultures. Each chemically relaxed milk-producing cow or buffalo that died became poisoned vulture bait. As cattle turned into better dairy machines, as the city ate more ice cream, butterscotch crunch, nutty buddy, and chocolate chip, as it drank more mango milkshake, vultures' necks began to droop as though they were tired and simply couldn't stay awake. Silver beards of saliva dripped from their beaks, and one by one they tumbled off their branches, dead. Not many noticed the passing of the friendly old birds. There was so much else to look forward to. And I'll read you two paragraphs from the first chapter, which is called Where Do Old Birds Go to Die? She lived in the graveyard like a tree. At dawn, she saw the crows off and welcomed the bats home. At dusk, she did the opposite. Between shifts, she conferred with the ghosts of vultures that loomed in her high branches. She felt the gentle grip of their talons, like an ache in an amputated limb. She gathered they weren't altogether unhappy at having excused themselves and exited from the story. When she first moved in, she endured months of casual cruelty like a tree would, without flinching. She didn't turn to see which small boy had thrown a stone at her, didn't crane her neck to read the insults scratched into her bark. When people called her names, clown without a circus, queen without a palace, she let the hurt blow through her branches like a breeze and used the music of her rustling leaves as balm to ease the pain. And this is a page from a chapter in the middle of the book, as you can see, called The Nativity. It was peacetime, or so they said. All morning, a hot wind had whipped through the city streets, driving sheets of grit, soda bottle caps, and beady stubs before it, smacking them into car windscreens and cyclists' eyes. When the wind died, the sun, already high in the sky, burned through the haze, and once again the heat rose and shimmered on the streets like a belly dancer. People waited for the thunder shower that always followed a dust storm, but it never came. Fire raged through a swathe of huts huddled together on the river bank, gutting more than 2,000 in an instant. Still the amaltas bloomed, a brilliant, defiant yellow. Each blazing summer, it reached up and whispered to the hot brown sky, "Fuck you." She appeared quite suddenly, a little after midnight. No angels sang, no wise men brought gifts, but a million stars rose in the east to herald her arrival. One moment she wasn't there, and the next, there she was on the concrete pavement in a crib of litter, silver cigarette foil, a few plastic bags, and empty packets of Uncle Chips. She lay in a pool of light under a column of swarming neon-lit mosquitoes, naked. Her skin was blue-black, sleek as a baby seal's. She was wide awake, but perfectly quiet, unusual for someone so tiny. Perhaps in those first short months of her life, she had already learned that tears, her tears at least, were futile. A thin white horse tethered to the railing, a small dog with mange, a concrete-colored garden lizard, 2 palm-striped squirrels who should have been asleep, and from her hidden perch, a she-spider with a swollen egg sac watched over her. Other than that, she seemed to be utterly alone. Around her, the city sprawled for miles, 1,000-year-old sorceress, dozing but not asleep, even at this hour. Gray flyovers snaked out of her Medusa skull, tangling and untangling under the yellow sodium haze. Sleeping bodies of homeless people lined their high, narrow pavements, head to toe, head to toe, head to toe, looping into the distance. Old secrets were folded into the furrows of her loose parchment skin. Each wrinkle was a street, each street a carnival, each arthritic joint a crumbling amphitheater where stories of love and madness, stupidity, delight, and unspeakable cruelty had been played out for centuries. But this was to be the dawn of her resurrection. Her new masters wanted to hide her knobby, varicose veins under imported fishnet stockings, cram her withered tits into saucy padded bras, and jam her aching feet into pointed high-heeled shoes. They wanted her to swing her stiff old hips and reroute the edges of her grimace upwards into a frozen, empty smile. It was the summer Grandma became a whore.
Thank you.
Thank you.